The colony burns. The sun rose gently over Arelon Prime, the human colony that had been called the jewel of the Outer Rim. Children played in the streets, merchants opened their shops, and farmers tended to the glowing fields that stretched for miles. Life here was calm, far from the politics and wars of the core worlds. No one imagined that by nightfall, everything would be fire and ash. High above the planet, the thin blue sky shimmered, then darkened. People pointed, thinking it was just a passing shadow from an asteroid or freighter. But the shadow grew, and soon the sun was blotted out. From the heavens, massive shapes emerged, warships, black and angular, their hulls marked with the red symbols of the Vorath Dominion. They came in silence, a predator's silence, until the first beam of light cut through the air and struck the central city. The explosion shook the ground, glass shattered in every home, and the laughter of children turned to screams. Buildings crumbled as more strikes followed, the sky filled with trails of burning debris. Communication towers sent out desperate SOS signals, each one echoing into the void of space. Mayday, Mayday, Arelon under attack. The voices cried, but no answer came. Governor Elric tried to rally the defense force. The colony's patrol ships scrambled, but they were few, a dozen small craft against hundreds of alien war machines. In minutes, the patrol fleet was gone, torn apart like paper in a storm. On the open channels, the Vorath commander's voice crackled, cold and mocking. Humans, you are weak. Your allies are far, no one will come. Panic spread through the streets. Families ran carrying whatever they could hold. Some tried to board evacuation shuttles, but the Vorath targeted the launch pads, turning escape into fire and ruin. Others fled into the underground tunnels, the old mining shafts that ran beneath the colony. The air there was thick and dusty, the darkness broken only by emergency lights. Mothers tried to comfort crying children, whispering that help would come soon. But even they didn't believe it. Above, the warships continued their bombardment. Farms burned, factories collapsed, and the great crystal dome of the main city cracked and fell. The colony's proud landmarks were reduced to rubble. One hospital tried to keep running under siege, but a direct hit silenced it forever. The smell of smoke and scorched earth spread for miles. In a bunker beneath the governor's residence, a small team worked frantically to send a final signal. The transmission was weak, the power failing. Arelon, falling, repeat, Arelon, falling. The voice stuttered before cutting out. That single broken message raced across the stars, searching for anyone who would listen. The technicians looked at each other, unsure if the signal would reach human space before it was too late. The Vorath commander, watching from his flagship, ordered his ships to circle the planet like vultures. He enjoyed the slow destruction, sending waves of fire down on the helpless colony. To him this was a message that the Vorath could take any human world they wished, and no one could stop them. But far away, deep in the black of space, the signal had found its way to the ears of someone who would not ignore it. Back on Arelon Prime, the survivors huddled in silence. The distant booms of destruction echoed like thunder. Dust rained down from the ceilings of the tunnels. Children clung to their parents, their eyes wide with fear. Old men stared at the walls, whispering old war prayers. No one knew if they would see another sunrise. In the final hours of the day, the Vorath landed troops to finish the job. Armored soldiers marched through the ruins, rounding up those too weak to run. A girl of 12 was pulled from the rubble of her home, calling for her brother who never answered. The alien soldier laughed, tossing her toward the holding pens. Every moment, hope seemed to die a little more. Yet, somewhere in the darkness of space, engines were already warming. Humans had heard the cry for help, and soon, the Vorath would learn that burning one human world would awaken the fury of all humanity. The night fell on Arelon Prime, lit only by the fires of its destruction. And in that fire, the seeds of vengeance were born, the call to arms at the edge of human space. In the great command hall of the United Terran Fleet, a single alert tone echoed. Technicians turned toward the central display as the broken signal from Arelon Prime played again and again. Arelon. Falling. Then static. The voices in the room went quiet. Everyone knew what those words meant. Another human world had been struck. And this time it was not a border outpost or hidden research station. This was a full colony, home to millions. This was war. Admiral Marcus Rourke stood at the head of the table, his face lit by the cold blue glow of the tactical map. Arelon Prime was shown as a small flickering red dot on the star chart. Around it, enemy signatures swarmed. Like black clouds, he had seen war before. But this was different. This was a direct challenge to humanity's right to exist beyond its homeworld. The other admirals spoke of caution, of negotiations, of sending a small task force to investigate. Rourke's jaw tightened. "We will not investigate," he said, voice steady. "We will answer." The decision spread through the fleet. Like fire through dry grass, signals flashed across subspace, encrypted orders leaping from one relay to the next. From the icy moons of Jupiter to the mining colonies of Vega, human ships began to move. The call to arms was not just a command. It was a promise of vengeance. Captains left their families with quiet farewells. Young recruits stood in lines. At the shipyards, signing their names into the fleet registry, old war veterans dusted off their uniforms, their eyes hard with memories of past battles. On the industrial world of Karos 9, giant factory doors opened, releasing the first wave of heavy destroyers. On the water world of Nereid, submarine carriers rose from the oceans and launched into orbit. Freighters were stripped and rebuilt into armored gunships. Space stations loaded their missile silos to capacity. Even civilian ships, fitted with shields and weapons, answered the call. The galaxy had never seen humans move with such speed. In the council chambers, there were voices of doubt. Some feared that gathering too large a fleet would provoke other alien empires. Others argued that humans did not have the resources for a war this size. But outside those walls, no one cared about politics on every human world. The story of Arelon's destruction spread. Images of burning cities, of children running through ash, played on every screen, and each time they played, more people volunteered. Humanity was not only going to fight, it was going to fight with everything it had. Days turned to weeks. The fleets grew. 100,000 ships, then 200,000. The numbers kept climbing. At every shipyard, engineers worked without rest. Men and women welded armor under the glow of molten steel. Robotic cranes lowered massive railgun barrels into place. Fuel lines roared as reactors came online. The blackness of space around human territory began to fill with the cold light of warships preparing for departure. Admiral Rourke visited each major fleet group. He stood on the decks, speaking to crews in simple words they would remember. "They think we are weak," he said. "They think we will hide, but when we arrive, they will learn we are made of something they cannot kill." His speeches were short, but no one forgot them. In mess halls, in engineering bays, in pilot-ready rooms, people repeated his words like a battle prayer. Intelligence reports came in from the border. Vorath patrols were falling back. It was clear they had not expected a response of this scale. The Vorath believed humanity's strength was scattered and slow. They had never imagined that so many warships could be gathered under one command. But the humans kept building, kept calling more ships to the assembly point. By the fourth week, the count reached 500,000. By the fifth, it was 700,000 from orbit. The sight was something no one would ever forget. A wall of steel and firepower stretching across the stars. Carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and corvettes, each armed, fueled, and ready. Supply ships floated among them, carrying ammunition, food, and spare parts. Medical vessels waited to treat the wounded. Every piece of the fleet was in place on the night before departure. Rourke stood alone in the observation deck of his flagship, the Iron Resolve. He looked at the endless fleet and thought of Arelon Prime. He thought of the broken signal, of the people hiding in the dark. He thought of the Vorath commander's voice, and he promised himself that voice would fall silent forever when dawn came. Rourke's voice went out across the entire fleet. It was carried on every frequency, from the smallest fighter to the largest carrier. "Today we go to answer the Vorath," he said, "not with words, but with the only language they understand." The engines roared to life. The stars shifted as 700,000 human warships aligned for the jump. And in that moment, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. The gathering storm, the jump point to Vorath space, was a cold and silent place. There were no planets here, only drifting rocks and the thin light of distant stars. For years, this region had been nothing but an empty border. Now it was the largest human fleet gathering in history. Ship after ship arrived, breaking the darkness with the flare of their drives, from the giant carriers that could launch 1,000 fighters to the small, fast corvettes that hunted in packs. They took their positions. The fleet stretched so far that even from the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Rourke could not see its end. It was like a steel ocean, calm on the surface, but filled with the power to drown a world. The commanders met in the main war room aboard Rourke's flagship. Holomaps filled the air with glowing images of Vorath territory. Lines marked planned attack routes, supply corridors, and fallback positions. Each commander spoke of their role, their target, their timing. No one argued, everyone understood. The mission: they were not going to win a single battle. They were going to break the Vorath dominion itself. Far from the jump point, on human worlds, the final preparations continued. Families sent messages to loved ones in the fleet. Some messages were short, just a few words of love and hope. Others were longer, filled with memories and promises for the day the war would be over. Soldiers read these messages in quiet corners of their ships, gripping them like lifelines. In the deep repair bays of the fleet's support ships, mechanics worked without pause. They checked shield emitters, polished weapon barrels, and replaced worn parts. Every ship had to be ready. There would be no second chances. Fuel lines hissed as tanks were filled to the brim. Cargo drones moved in constant streams, loading ammunition crates, missile pods, and food rations. In the medical ships, doctors prepared operating rooms, stocked with supplies for the wounded they knew would soon arrive. The fleet was not just a military force. It was a living city. It had kitchens and hospitals, training decks and sleeping quarters. Pilots drilled again and again, practicing formations and attack runs. Fighter squadrons painted new insignias on their ships, names like Vengeance Wing, Erelon's Wrath, and Black Horizon. Each name carried the weight of what had happened to Erelon Prime. As the days passed, intelligence ships returned with fresh reports. Vorath defenses were shifting, patrol routes were being altered, and large fleets were moving toward their borders. It was clear the Vorath now understood something was coming, but not how big. They did not yet know that 700,000 ships waited just beyond their reach. Some commanders wanted to launch early, to strike before the enemy could fully prepare, but Rourke refused. "Let the storm build," he said. "When we move, we will move like the sky itself is falling." One night, a scout ship slipped through Vorath space and returned with something no one expected: a recording from a captured Vorath channel. In it, a Vorath officer spoke of Erelon with pride. He laughed about the burning cities and the cries of the survivors. In the silence that followed, the crew of the Iron Resolve listened, and they swore, in voices low but steady, that the Vorath would pay for every word. Rourke ordered the message to be played fleet-wide, not to spread anger recklessly, but to remind everyone why they were here. Across the Armada, crews listened. Some clenched their fists, others sat in silence. But in every heart, the will to fight burned hotter. Training intensified. War games were run in full scale. Entire divisions practiced coordinated strikes using simulation drones as stand-ins for Vorath ships. Commanders rehearsed rapid redeployment in case of traps. Supply ships practiced refueling entire battle groups without stopping their advance. The fleet was becoming more than just a gathering of ships. It was becoming a single massive weapon. From the observation decks, the sight was unlike anything in human history. Rows of ships stretched toward infinity, their running lights glowing like a field of stars. The low hum of power cores filled the air. There was a weight to the moment, a sense that history was holding its breath. Everyone aboard every ship knew they stood on the edge of something that would change the galaxy forever. Then, after weeks of building, the final order came, a single word, sent on secure channels to every human vessel: ready. It was not shouted, it was not decorated with speeches. It was simply the signal that the waiting was over. In the silence after that message, thousands of engines powered up. The fleet shifted, aligning into attack formations. The storm was no longer gathering, it was about to break, and far beyond the jump point. In the heart of Vorath space, the enemy still did not know how close the fury of humanity had come. But they would know soon, very soon. The first strike, the moment of order came. The fleet moved like a living creature. Engines roared to life, jump drives spun up, and the stars began to twist in the void. 700,000 human warships, aligned in perfect formation, surged toward the Vorath border. To an observer, it would have been like watching a tidal wave of steel and fire spreading across the black. The first phase was silent. Stealth corvettes and recon frigates slipped ahead, jumping deep into enemy territory. Their job was to blind the Vorath before the main strike. Communication satellites were destroyed in bursts of light. Sensor stations were sliced apart by pinpoint laser fire. Supply depots and fuel stations along the border were reduced to glowing debris. By the time the Vorath realized something was wrong, their entire early warning net was gone. In the main fleet, tension hung like a heavy weight. Pilots sat in their cockpits, fingers resting on controls, breathing slow. Gunners checked targeting systems for the 100th time. On the Iron Resolve, Admiral Rourke stood at the center of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the tactical display as red icons flickered into range. The Vorath defense fleet was forming ahead, not small hundreds of ships, but nowhere near enough. The Vorath commander on the other side sent a challenge signal. "This is Vorath space, you will turn back," the alien voice growled. Rourke gave no reply. Instead, he raised his hand, and a single word left his lips: fire. The darkness between the fleets lit up like a newborn sun. Railgun rounds, plasma lances, and missile swarms tore across the void. The first volley ripped through the Vorath front line before they could even return fire. Enemy shields flared and failed, hulls split open, and explosions turned warships into clouds of burning metal. On the human side, cheers erupted, but no one slowed down. The attack continued, relentless. Fighter squadrons launched from carriers in perfect waves. Their engines burned bright as they dove through the chaos. Weaving between larger ships, they targeted weapon platforms, shield generators, and command bridges. Vorath fighters scrambled to meet them, but they were too slow, too few. The humans cut through them like a blade through smoke in orbit above. A Vorath supply moon. A special operations team dropped from a stealth frigate. They moved quickly across the frozen surface, planting charges on massive fuel tanks. Within minutes, the entire facility erupted into fire. From orbit, it looked like a new sun had bloomed against the dark rock. The moon's defenses went silent, and the human fleet pressed forward. The Vorath tried to regroup, pulling their surviving ships into a tighter formation. But Rourke had already seen the move. He ordered 3 battle groups to break off and flank the enemy from both sides. Caught between the hammer and the anvil, the Vorath line shattered. Ships turned to flee. But the humans were faster. Every escape route was cut off. Every fleeing ship hunted down in the middle of the battle. The Vorath commander sent a final desperate broadcast. "You cannot win. The Dominion will crush you," he roared. Rourke's reply was calm, almost quiet. "You are already crushed." With the last Vorath warship destroyed or disabled, the first battle was over. The humans had taken their first step into enemy space, and it had been a decisive, crushing victory. Around the wreckage of the battle, salvage ships moved in, collecting data, rescuing any human prisoners found aboard. Medical ships rushed to help the wounded. The fleet had taken losses, but far fewer than expected. In the quiet after the fight, the crews looked out at the debris field. Vorath ships, once symbols of terror, now drifted in silence. The image was burned into every human mind. The day. The hunters became the hunted. Rourke called a fleet-wide transmission. "You have done more than win a battle today," he said. "You have shown the galaxy that humanity will not be prey." His voice carried to every ship, every deck, every soldier, and in the silence that followed, there was no doubt the war had truly begun. The fleet did not stop to rest. Engines flared again as they moved deeper into Vorath space. Ahead lay shipyards, war factories, and worlds that had never known defeat, but now they would know fear. And for Arelon Prime, for the countless dead, humanity would make sure that fear never faded. The wrath of humanity, the wreckage of the first battle, still drifted in the void when the human fleet moved on. There was no pause, no long celebration, no waiting for the enemy to recover. Humanity's answer to the attack on Arelon Prime had only begun. 700,000 warships surged deeper into Vorath space like a flood that could not be stopped. Ahead lay the Vorath industrial sector, the heart of their war machine. Here, entire planets were nothing but shipyards and weapons factories. Massive orbital forges hung above gas giants, powered by mining operations on their moons. Every Vorath warship that had ever terrorized a human world had been born in these places. And now, those places were the target. The first strike was against Drukhall Forge, a planet-sized station wrapped in metal and glowing from the heat of its furnaces. It was guarded by hundreds of heavy cruisers and defense platforms. The Vorath expected the humans to attack with caution, to probe for weaknesses instead. The humans came in full force. 3 carrier groups jumped in at once, disgorging thousands of fighters that swarmed across the sky. Battleships followed, unleashing broadsides that ripped through the defense line. Within minutes, the outer guns of Drukhall were silent, but Rourke had given strict orders: no harm to civilians, no strikes on unarmed transports. The human fleet moved with surgical precision. Every target was a warship, a weapons platform, or a military factory. To the Vorath workers watching from the safety zones, it was a strange and terrifying sight. The humans destroyed everything that could make war, but left the innocent untouched. The Vorath propaganda, which had painted humanity as savage and cruel, began to crack. After Drukhall, the fleet split into smaller task forces to cover more ground. One group struck Vor Station, the main assembly point for Vorath dreadnoughts. Another raided the massive supply world Karnas, seizing fuel, ammunition, and repair parts for the human fleet. In each battle, the humans moved fast, hit hard, and vanished before the Vorath could regroup. The enemy began calling them the Black Wall, a force so large it blotted out the stars when it came. Every victory added to the fleet's momentum. Morale soared among the crews. Pilots painted Arelon's burning cities on their ships as kill marks. Gunners named their weapons after lost friends and family. Before every battle, some captains broadcast the names of Arelon's dead across open channels. Vorath soldiers heard them and felt the weight of what they had done, on Vorath-controlled worlds. Whispers spread. Some said the humans would burn every planet they touched. Others said the humans spared those who did not fight. This second rumor began to grow. In some battles, Vorath garrisons surrendered before a single shot was fired. They had learned that surrender to the humans meant life, while resistance meant only destruction. Admiral Rourke understood the power of this. He knew fear could be a weapon, but so could mercy. The Vorath leadership could not paint humanity as mindless killers if their own soldiers returned home alive. And so, the fleet's reputation became something more complex. To the Vorath warlords, the humans were a nightmare. To the common people, they were the bringers of justice. In one operation, the human fleet captured a Vorath prison ship. Inside were over 2,000 human captives taken from colonies across the border. The moment the prisoners saw the Iron Resolve's emblem, they wept. Some had thought they would never see a human face again. The rescue was broadcast across the fleet, a reminder of why they fought by now. The Vorath High Command was in chaos. Their fleets were scattered, their shipyards crippled. Every attempt to form a defensive line was broken before it could be completed. The humans seemed to be everywhere at once, and with every strike, they pushed closer to the Vorath capital. Rourke called a meeting of his senior officers. The holomap, lit up with red markers showing the enemy's remaining strongholds. There were not many left. We end this at Dracoth Prime, Rourke said, his voice calm but final. The officers nodded, knowing that this would be the greatest battle of the war. If they won, the Vorath Dominion would fall. If they lost, humanity would pay in blood. As the fleet prepared for the final campaign, messages poured in from every human world. They were not just orders, they were promises. Finish this, the people said. Bring them justice for Arelon. And the fleet promised they would. The wrath of humanity was no longer just the name of a campaign. It was a living force, carried in the hearts of every soldier, every pilot, every captain. The Vorath had started this war thinking humans were prey. Now they understood the truth. Humans were predators, and they were hunting. The engines roared once more. The black wall turned toward Dracoth Prime, and the galaxy braced itself for the storm that was coming. The final battle, the Vorath capital system. Dracoth Prime had never been breached. It was the heart of their empire, ringed with defense stations, orbital cannons, and fleets that could block out the stars. Generations of Vorath leaders had claimed that no enemy could reach it. Now 700,000 human warships were on their way, and nothing would stop them. As the human fleet emerged from jump space, the view filled the screens, a massive gas giant with emerald clouds. Its moons lined with shipyards. The capital world itself shone below, a world of black seas and silver towers. Around it, the largest Vorath armada ever assembled waited. They had pulled every available ship from across their empire. Their formation was tight, a wall of steel meant to hold back the storm. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Rourke stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes scanned the display as enemy ships filled the sensors. "This is it," he said quietly. No turning back. The order was given, and the human fleet began to spread into battle formation. Carriers moved to the rear, launching wave after wave of fighters. Heavy battleships took the front line, their shields flaring as they powered up weapons. The first exchange came quickly. Vorath cannons opened fire, unleashing beams that carved through space like lightning. The humans answered with a storm of missiles and railgun fire. Explosions lit the darkness, debris spinning away as ships on both sides were struck. The void between the fleets became a raging sea of light and shadow. Fighter squadrons clashed in the middle ground. The sky swirled with duels between nimble human craft and heavily armored Vorath interceptors. Pilots dodged and weaved, engines burning bright as they fought to break through. On the right flank, a squadron called Arelon's Wrath punched a hole in the enemy line. Behind them, bombers streaked in and delivered payloads directly into a Vorath carrier. The blast ripped the giant vessel apart, sending pieces of it tumbling into the planet's gravity well. Rourke watched the battle unfold like a conductor leading an orchestra. He called in flanking maneuvers, shifting destroyers to exploit gaps. When a Vorath dreadnought pushed through the center, he ordered 3 battleships to converge and tear it apart. Every move was calculated, every order given with precision. But the Vorath fought with the desperation of an empire on the edge. Their capital was behind them, and they had nowhere else to run. The battle raged for hours. Waves of reinforcements jumped in for both sides. Some human ships were lost, entire crews giving their lives to hold the line. Medical vessels darted between the wrecks, pulling survivors from drifting escape pods. The comm channels were filled with shouts, orders, and the sound of weapons firing. There was no quiet, only the endless roar of war. Then came the moment Rourke had been waiting for. A gap opened in the enemy formation near the largest Vorath command ship, the flagship of their high commander. If that ship fell, the entire Vorath fleet would lose coordination. Rourke ordered the Iron Resolve forward, leading a spearhead of cruisers and destroyers. They punched through the last line of defense, shields flaring under the enemy barrage. Boarding teams readied themselves, weapons in hand. The Iron Resolve's grappling arms locked onto the Vorath flagship. The sound of metal tearing echoed through the decks as airlocks opened. Human Marines stormed inside, fighting through corridors. Filled with enemy soldiers, every step was taken in blood and fire in the command chamber. The Vorath High Commander stood defiantly. Rourke stepped forward, his voice cold and sharp. "It's over," he said. The alien sneered. But the look in his eyes told the truth. He knew the war was lost. The Vorath leader was taken alive. Bound in chains, outside, the flagship's surrender signal flashed across the battlefield. One by one, Vorath ships ceased fire. The capital's orbital guns powered down. Silence began to spread through the coms. It was not the silence of peace yet, but the silence of a fight that was finished. From orbit, the humans saw Dracoth Prime's silver towers untouched. Rourke had kept his word. Civilians were not targets. The human fleet held its position. Its sheer presence enough to ensure there would be no more resistance. The war was over. The price had been high, but humanity had won in the quiet that followed. Rescue ships began their work. Wounded were evacuated, damaged vessels towed to safety. Across the fleet, crews stood together, some in celebration, others in mourning for those who would not return. And somewhere in the distance, the ruins of Arelon Prime waited to hear the news that their vengeance had been delivered. The Vorath Dominion had fallen, and the galaxy would remember the day the Black Wall came to Dracoth Prime. Fury remembered the war was over. The Vorath fleet lay in ruins, their high commander in chains, and their capital under human control. But the galaxy would not forget what had happened here. Not the humans, not the Vorath, and not the countless other species who had watched from the shadows. The human fleet remained in Vorath space for weeks. It was not a force of occupation. It was a shield. Every day, ships patrolled the skies to ensure the ceasefire held. Supply convoys moved in to feed and rebuild the cities left without resources after the battle. For the Vorath civilians, the sight of human soldiers bringing food instead of fire was a shock. Whispers spread through the streets. The humans could have destroyed everything, but they didn't in the halls of the United Terran Fleet Command. Rourke stood before the council. He gave his report in simple words. The war had been won. The Vorath had surrendered unconditionally, and a treaty had been signed that guaranteed no attack on human space for generations. But he spoke less of the victory and more of the cost. Ships lost, lives ended, names that would never fade from memory. The council listened in silence. When he finished, there were no cheers, only the quiet understanding that such a war must never be needed again. Back on Arelon Prime, the survivors emerged from the tunnels for the first time since the attack. They walked through streets still scarred by fire. The ruins stood like dark monuments to the day their world had almost died. But now, above them, human ships floated. In the sky, not as a desperate rescue, but as guardians, Rourke himself came to Arelon. Stepping onto the soil that had started it all, crowds gathered, many of them holding photos of family lost in the first attack. They reached out to him, touching his arm, thanking him not just for vengeance, but for giving them back their pride. In the center of the ruined city, a memorial was built. A ring of black stone encircled the names of every life lost on Arelon. At its heart burned an eternal flame, fueled by a small reactor brought from Earth itself. It was lit in a quiet ceremony. No speeches, only silence. The flame's reflection shone in the eyes of everyone present. It was a promise that humanity would never forget and never again allow such a loss to go unanswered. The 700,000 warships of the Black Wall, did not stay together. Slowly, they returned to their home ports, some to be repaired, some to be retired, and some to stand ready for whatever came next. But wherever they went, they carried with them the memory of what they had done. Crews told the story in every station and colony, how the fleet had risen as one, how it had moved like a storm across the galaxy, and how it had shattered an empire. Young recruits listened wide-eyed, old veterans listened with quiet nods, and everywhere, the legend grew. Among the Vorath, the war was spoken of in two tones, fear and respect. Fear of the Black Wall, that endless armada that could appear without warning. Respect for the fact that the humans had shown restraint when they could have chosen total destruction. Vorath parents told their children the story not to stir hatred, but to warn them, never provoke the humans, for they are peaceful until you give them no choice. Years passed, but the story did not fade. In human schools, the history lessons told of Arelon Prime. Teachers showed the images of the colony burning, then the great fleet rising in response. Students recited the names of the ships that had fought at Dracoth Prime on the anniversary of the battle. Fleets across human space turned on their running lights in silent tribute. For one night, the stars themselves seemed to glow brighter. Admiral Rourke retired quietly. He refused medals, refused titles. He said only that the victory belonged to every man and woman who had stood their ground. He returned to a small home on a green world far from the core. There, he lived in peace. But visitors often came, young officers who wanted to hear the story from his own lips. He would tell it simply, without embellishment, but his eyes would grow distant when he spoke of the first signal from Arelon. The day everything changed. One evening, as the sun set over his home, a small group of children came to see him. They had learned about the war in school, and they wanted to meet the man who had led the Black Wall. Rourke smiled at them and said, "I did not win that war alone. Humanity did." He pointed to the stars. "Remember this. We are peaceful people, but when one of us is attacked, all of us will rise." And so the legend lived on, not just in books, not just in speeches, but in the hearts of the people who knew what it meant to stand together. The galaxy would remember Arelon Prime. It would remember the day 700,000 human warships crossed the stars. And it would remember the truth behind that day, that there is nothing more dangerous, more unstoppable, and more unyielding than the wrath of humanity.